Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm going to bring the first video in a series of videos trying to focus on helping everyone out when it comes to capturing opal. So photos, and most of these principles will apply for videos as well, but photos is a good start. And I want to go through this because opal is probably the toughest of the gemstones to capture, and we will go through a lot of the reasons why and how to kind of tackle some of these issues. So let's get into it. So why is it so challenging? These are the points that we'll cover throughout the video. So opal, as we all know, it's got all the colours of the rainbow. It's got the full spectrum in there. So we're going to need the right light. It's probably 90% of the problem. Lighting is almost everything when it comes to photography. The equipment that you're using to take the actual photo won't mean anything if you don't have the right light there to actually get the opals to show off their full potential. Directionality is another issue. We've got two eyes, so we're looking at it with two lenses, whereas cameras only have one point. So it's a single lens just trying to capture the full features of that opal. So if you actually look at some opals with one eye closed, you'll actually get a good idea of what that does. Opals are also, most typically, pretty damn small. So we need to zoom in or we need to get some macro lenses involved. And of course, there's just so much variety. Just saying photos of opal is very broad. We've got every kind of opal out there. So boulder, white opal, black opal, crystal opal, and all those international opals as well. They're all different. They all play differently. And to capture them all well, we need to take into account a lot of different ideas. And sometimes one setup just might not work for everything. So we'll start with the first issue, the range of color. So to see a color, I'll keep the physics to a minimum, but to see a color, your light needs to actually have that color. So the sun or daylight, it just beams the full spectrum of color. That's why everyone always says you can't beat sunlight. Sunlight is incredibly good. It just has every color there, which means anything that it hits, it'll have the full range of color to play with, and it'll be able to show off as much as humanly possible. Whereas artificial lights, we struggle because it doesn't contain the full spectrum of color. So as you can see here on that color chart, you can't get all of that in a light without paying quite a bit of money. So this comes to the CRI, which is the color rendering index. This is a measure that tells you how full the light spectrum is within that light. So the sun, you're looking at close to 100. Well, it is 100. Everything else, we're trying to aim for that kind of number, but the CRI has to be at least 90 to get even close to showing your opal off. I typically like to aim for 96 plus, just because we lose a lot of the great colors that you see in opal, even at 90. 90 to me isn't really enough to get the full play, but it will give you a good start. And if you're just taking some basic photos just to show friends or whatever, it's probably good enough. But if you're trying to sell opal or anything, I'd be saying 95, 96 plus. So the other thing with the range of color is that you need to focus on the color temperature as well. It's not as important as the CRI, that comes first, but the temperature, if it's too cool, you'll end up showing off a lot of the violets, a lot of the blues, those cooler colors. Whereas if it's too warm, you're just going to be bombarding it with yellow and red, and all you're going to be able to see are the yellow and reds. So you can see there on the bottom where that picture is with the lights, you've got your color temperatures. 10,000 all the way to the right there. Way too cool. Your opal's just going to show off its blues. If you've got any red on black, you're going to have a massive struggle. But on the other hand, if you go down to 1,000, all you're going to see is yellow. Even if you've got a white opal, all you're going to see is yellow. It's a huge thing to consider. Just make sure you're somewhere around the middle there. Like about 5,000 is typically what I try to recommend. And I'll put a whole heap of links in the description and possibly the pinned comment on some of the equipment that I use and would recommend people to get if they're interested. Most of it doesn't cost much, so definitely check it out. There'll just be Amazon links in there for products that I've either bought and tried or ones that are very similar. So if we go to artificial lighting, like I said before, the sun is great. It's actually perfect. It's incredibly good. But you can't control the temperature or the position of the sun. The other thing is that you can't control the brightness. Sometimes if you bombard your shot with too much light from the sun directly overhead, that will just wash out everything and your camera just will struggle too much. You need to try to provide it at the right time. A lot of people have certain times that they like. They like to do it indoors next to a window, get all their positioning and everything sorted. And it does work, but what happens on days when the conditions just aren't there, like it's raining all day, it might be raining for a week depending on where you live. In those cases, we've got to tackle it a little bit differently. So you need the right conditions and all of that. Really hard to do. So we go artificial, and starting off with fluorescent bulbs, just don't do it. The CRI is terrible. You will always end up showing like 50% of the possible range of color in your opal. It's just not a reasonable substitution. So just avoid fluorescent bulbs. They are the worst. The incandescent halogen lights are much better. The CRI is pretty good, but a lot of the time they're really hot. The energy efficiency, I don't worry about that too much unless you're really concerned about your power bills and you're doing a lot of shots or a lot of filming. And a lot of the time they can produce a bit of a yellow tint. They typically tend to be on the lower end of the temperature scale, so down there towards the yellows. Most of the time about 3000. LEDs, way back in the day, LEDs sucked. They were there with the fluorescent bulbs. They were just terrible. They just weren't putting out a good light. Nowadays, you can actually get 95 plus for fairly cheap. I myself use a 96 or 97 at the moment. So it's right up there. It lets you show off all the opals, and that's why I can capture them when I'm doing my thumbnails and when I'm doing videos. Without that light, it just struggles. I started the channel and I used a poorer quality light. If you go back to those older videos, you'll be able to see that I wasn't capturing the opals well. And at the end of videos and stuff, I'd always say like, this is pretty disappointing because I can see this opal and it's much better than what this light's showing off. That was when I started looking at it and working out that the CRI rating is it's just the most important factor. So the other thing you can do with light is either have it direct or diffused. So on the bottom here, you can see a picture of a direct on the left and a diffused light on the right. That's the same light at the same kind of conditions. And you can see that it's completely different. One, you've just got those bulbs just shooting beams of light. The other, it's passing through a bit of a filter and it just it breaks up the light. And instead of shooting sharp pointed beams, it's kind of just a wave of light. So a lot of the time when other people are doing jewelry and gemstone photography, they are using that diffused light. It's really good. It's a nice soft light, nice even light. That's why people use light boxes and stuff. Opal is actually a bit of a hindering factor. So the diffused light, it's still good. The CRI is still fine. The light quality is still good. The brightness you can control and get it really nice. But because the light's coming in from all over the place, the patterns on the opal start getting washed out. So if you've got a nice harlequin pattern or something, and it's got sharp edges, maybe a nice flagstone, sharp edges, it just doesn't retain that sharpness. So you'll start losing that, and those edges will kind of fade, and everything will wash into each other. It's why when we're playing with an opal and you get that play of color, that will actually get diminished by using a diffused light, because that positioning is less important now. So then we get to the size issue, because size changes the game when you're doing photography. And a lot of the time, our opals and other gemstones, we run into the same problem. They're just small. Now the camera, in this case, is way less important than the lens. You can zoom with any camera, but eventually it gets to a point where it starts using a digital zoom and you're just going to get grainy, fuzzy, pixelated images. You need to actually get a lens that will help you get that shot without going into the digital zoom. Just play with your phone now, zoom in 2 times and say, oh yeah, and you'll see that it's all fine. Zoom in 10 times, zoom in 20 times if you can. You'll see what I mean. The picture just turns into absolute rubbish. That's where on the right here you can see there's a macro lens. That's the one I'm planning to get for my camera at the moment. Just below that you can see the macro lens. I've mentioned it in a few videos. That's the one I use. I'll have links to that as well. Very cheap, like $20, and you can get a little macro lens that you can just clip onto your phone and it completely changes the game for you. But then the camera settings start kicking in, especially if you're using a phone. You've got to start going into the pro kind of settings and manually setting a lot of things. So ISO, keep it low, below 100. If you've got enough light, below 100. The higher you go, and even at 200, you're going to start getting a bit of a grainy look. So you'd want to avoid that. It's trying to draw in as much light as possible. So you want to keep that kind of ISO low and let the light actually do the work. If you don't have enough light, then you have to bump it up, or you have to get more light to try to keep it down. You just want to avoid that graininess, especially with gems. So the white balance, you just want to tweak that to match your light. A lot of the times you'll buy a light and it'll tell you exactly what the temperature is. Use that, set it, and you'll be perfectly fine. So if you've got a 5500 Kelvin light, just set it to 5500 and you're perfectly set. The exposure or brightness, that's really simple. Just if you don't have enough light, bump that up. It's better to bump that up slightly than bumping the ISO up. So do that first. If you think that 200 is looking a bit dodge, then you might just need to brighten up your light or increase your exposure a little bit. But be careful in doing it because you'll see when it's going wrong. Now with focus, you have to go to manual with a camera or a phone. The autofocus will really struggle when you're using a macro lens because a slight movement in the depth of either your phone, if you don't have it on a tripod, or your Opal, if you're just holding it by hand, it'll start hunting for something to focus on. And you'll just be going backwards and forwards. It's a nightmare. I struggled with it a lot when I first got the lens. It took a lot of playing to get it right. So just make sure you manually set that and then just try to keep them at that same distance for the whole time, even when you're trying to rotate your Opal. Now backgrounds are tricky. A lot of the time you want to have a fairly plain background. You don't need to add texture or color to it. We've got Opal. I mean, these stones are so bright, so beautiful. And here you can see there's 3 examples using the recent stone I cut with Julian, for Julian. And it was a beautiful looking stone, but these 3 pictures just aren't doing it any justice at all. So this was taken with my phone, just through the normal lens. And on the first one you can see, first and second one, what it's doing is it's focusing on the background. Now this happens a lot because the camera just hunts. And if you tap on your Opal and it starts auto focusing, it'll still pick the background in a lot of cases. So this was 2 cases where it's picked the table behind my hand, and in the second one, for some reason, it's decided the rug is more important than the Opal. Even if you tap on the Opal, it focuses and then it suddenly just defocuses out again. Just keep it plain. You can keep it black. You can keep it white. White is a lot easier for phones because the auto white balance will become an issue once you start playing with black, and I'll cover that more in a mobile phone related video. And you can see that issue on the right picture there. That's a pure black background, but what the phone's trying to do is auto white balance the color of the background, which is black, and trying to whiten that up just because it assumes it's meant to. So that's where you have to avoid that and set it on manual, and you can shoot on black. Or there are some tips and tricks around how to avoid it, which are actually pretty funny. So I will show those off in a future video. And yeah, I'd mentioned there crystals can get a doublet effect if you're shooting them on black. So always be careful of that as well. And that's it. That's really it. If you can manage to just start playing with those couple factors, you'll actually be able to take some really good pictures and videos. I mean, a lot of people have got a good hang of it, but hopefully this will just kick that up a level and you'll just be able to shoot so much better. Even some sellers and stuff can take some lessons from this and start producing way better pictures. You want to make sure you take a good picture that represents the Opal as best as possible. It saves the seller from getting disappointed by having a stone sell for way too little, and it saves the buyer from being disappointed when they buy a stone and they get it in their hand and it looks nothing like the picture or video. It's really important to get that kind of thing right because it sucks for the buyer, it sucks for the seller, it just sucks all around. It just sucks for everybody. No one has a good time when there's a bad picture or video, and it's really hard to get right. And I do feel for a lot of sellers, especially miners. I mean, you talk to a lot of miners and they're taking photos with whatever they can, however they can. Some of them have a really good time just using sunlight, but when they need to sell something and it's just terrible weather and they push on and try to take photos anyway, that's when it really sucks. So to have an artificial lighting setup that works and works well, it means any day of the week, any time, middle of the night, you're still fine. You can set up your shots and get a lot of excellent pictures. And someone that does it really well is Riley Gunn at 53 Frogs or NN Opals on YouTube. He's got his artificial light on point, he's got his camera on point, he's got everything set up, and it's how he gets so many auctions up on Opal auctions. He's just got it beautifully set up. The throughput is really good, and he captures his Opal great. And people buy it, you get it in hand, and what do you know? It actually looks a lot like the pictures and video. So hopefully that helps. The next time I do a video like this, it'll be focused on the really budget option. We've all got mobile phones. How to use a mobile phone and then maybe one or two attachments on top of that to get a good picture or video. Or if you've only got a mobile phone, it should help you in that case as well. We'll just use the sun and we'll see what we can do. I'll see you in that video. Like I said before, all the links will be in the description and possibly a pinned comment. And yeah, we'll get on to that next one. Get some equipment if you really need it. Otherwise, we'll make do with what you've got and see if we can't help you get much better pictures. So, see you in that video.